Okay, fellas, we're going to get started. I am pleased to introduce this month's speaker, who happens to be our pastor, Brandon Gilvin. Reverend Gilvin is a native of Mount Sterling, Kentucky, and he grew up and was baptized and ordained at the Somerset Christian Church. He's a graduate of Hiram College in Northeast Ohio and Vanderbilt Divinity School. Reverend Gilvin served most recently as the senior minister at First Christian Church in Chattanooga, but has also served congregations in Kansas and Missouri in international ecumenical settings based in Nairobi, Kenya, and Toronto, Canada, as the Associate Director of Week of Compassion, and as a program development consultant for Church World Service in Belgrade, Serbia. He also previously served here at Central as a Lilly Fellow back in the early 2000s. So with no further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Reverend Brandon Gilvin.
Well, it is just so good to be with you all today. I think one of the things that has really struck me about being at Central after 20 years is this sort of tension between how everything feels like it didn't change at all, and yet everything feels like it's changed to the point that I don't recognize it anymore. And so, it's been fun to kind of reconnect with folks and meet new folks who have joined Central in the 20 years since I was here previously. I did grow up in Mount Sterling, Kentucky, and I grew up on a farm just outside of town with my dad and my mom. My dad was a farmer, beef and tobacco, so sometimes I'll joke that what we really raised was heart pressure, more than anything. And my mom was a teacher. And they both valued education highly. My mom, because she was an educator, my dad, because of the circumstances that didn't allow him to have as many opportunities as my mom did as a kid. And they wanted my sisters and I to have a good bit of freedom in terms of what we wanted to do, what we could explore, how we could sort of engage the world. And that was evident in just about everything about our household, including when we would gather around for dinner. No topic was sort of off the table, so to speak, when we would gather. And we would have these sort of huge conversations, and maybe it was when we were young kids about things that we would imagine, or maybe as we got older, it was whatever the controversy on the news was that day. But it was a place where we learned to think and to imagine and to be able to be ourselves in community. And it's a really special way to grow up. That's been one of the blessings that I would add, too, about the family that Lisa and I have been working on building over the course of our marriage. When Lisa and I got married, we had I inherited two adult stepsons. And so I often joke that I don't really have the experience of being a dad as much as I'm kind of like a weird cousin who came out of nowhere to them. But one of the things that my stepson, after he and his husband got married and began the adoption process, they talked about how adoption has been this sort of legacy in their family on kind of cousins' side, adopting in both sides of their families, and then they were adopting a child. And so we started talking about our family as we adopted one another. So many ways we are always kind of families by choice in different settings, and to build a family by adopting one another has become kind of a way that we think about who we are as one family unit. And that kind of freedom that I talked about with my kind of childhood growing up around ideas has been something that we've worked to kind of replicate by building kind of a table where everyone is welcome, a house where everyone is welcome, where we can sit and eat and drink together and build community beyond the walls of this family and extend what it means to adopt and claim one another as friends and family. I want to talk about 3 pilgrimages that I have taken over the course of my life. And I want to talk about those because you all are still really kind of getting to know me, and I'm getting to know you all as a congregation. And so I want to take advantage of kind of every opportunity I have for you all to kind of know what makes me tick as a pastor in relationship with you. And so I want to talk about 3 big sort of events over the course of my life that have shaped my understanding of what it means to be part of the church. And I think the other reason that that's an important thing to kind of talk about is, as you know, someone who is coming to terms with the fact that he's middle-aged now, you know, it's interesting to look at the generational differences in the United States around involvement in religious institutions. And so as we think about that as a community, I think it's important to name the very personal reasons why we stay in church. And for me, it does kind of center around these 3 pilgrimages that I had over the course of my life. The first one is one that you may have heard me mention in worship previously, and I will always be grateful to the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in Kentucky for this opportunity. When I was 16, I was part of a mission trip sponsored by the region, and we went to Atlanta, Georgia, and rural Georgia on this mission trip where we put together a summer camp for a week or so for kids whose mothers were incarcerated. And this was a learning experience that whenever I run into those folks that I went on this trip with, we always come back to talking about that because it was that level of life change that we experienced. As you might imagine, you had kids from Lexington, Louisville, but also the counties who came to Georgia, and we were predominantly a Caucasian group of kids with 3 African American kids from Kentucky, and we found ourselves with campers who were predominantly African American and Latino. And for many of us, especially those of us who were from the less diverse parts of Kentucky, this was a cultural shock, as well as learning firsthand about how, and I like to quote Guy Waldrop on this, because it's the way that he described it has always stuck with me. We learned for the first time that the justice system isn't always just. And the reasons that women in poverty find themselves incarcerated and separated from their kids have a lot more to do than with just one act that comes with criminal consequences. It's much more complicated, and what it can do to families is something that lasts and doesn't always have the best consequences. These kids also came from diverse religious backgrounds, and so it wasn't a church camp in the classical sense. Instead, we focused on issues of African American and Latino culture in helping them get in touch a little bit more with their roots and build a sense of community for them as a camp. And then we did take the kids to visit their moms, who, through this program that we were working with, got a monthly visit as long as they qualified for visitation with their kids. And so we, as a group of high school kids, got to be part of that and watch the kids teach their moms the silly songs that they had learned in camp that week. And I walked away from this week experience as a 16-year-old with a new sort of appreciation for what the church can be and do. For me, growing up in this small rural church outside of Mount Sterling, church was this very small, homogeneous community, and you gathered together, you had worship, and you had a potluck, and that was church. And so to see the church teach a bunch of kids from Kentucky about systemic racism, to see the church give those kids an opportunity to build relationships with kids from a background that they couldn't even imagine, and to think about the real life things that keep us separated, whether that's geography, whether that's race, whether that's economics, whether that is issues of justice. That was a wake-up call. And I walked away with this sort of acknowledgement that, the church can do this. The second pilgrimage that I think of in tandem with this happened in 2000 when I was a student at Vanderbilt. And I was able to do a semester-long internship with the Quaker Peace Center in Cape Town, South Africa. And I worked as a peace educator in township schools. If you remember sort of the history of apartheid, townships were those areas that were set off for folks on the lower ends of sort of the ethnic hierarchy. So you were considered whites or Afrikaans, where usually, the Afrikaans are the Dutch settlement descendants, and then beneath that level, you had folks who were considered colored or multiracial, and then you had Bantu, so the folks who were ethnically original to the area, the indigenous populations. And so townships were divided up. They were for folks who were on the colored or folks who were on the Bantu level of the hierarchy, whereas white folks enjoyed the city. So this was probably about half a decade or so after the end of apartheid, and you were seeing all of the sort of challenges that come with a country trying to enact reconciliation. The emergence of gangs kind of stepping in to claim economic and other sort of power in the townships, and figuring out how to teach kids how to resolve conflicts peacefully was part of the programming of the Quaker Center. And so that sort of environment was an introduction for me, as well as learning about how organizations like Christian Aid, like Norwegian Church Aid, our own Church World Service and Week of Compassion help support organizations like the Quaker Peace Center, which not only did this sort of work, but had been a nonviolent actor in the fight against apartheid. In fact, it was kind of interesting because when I was there, the director of the Quaker Peace Center was married to the assistant minister of she was the deputy Ministry of Defense for the country. So for a Quaker to be married to someone who was in the Ministry of Defense was interesting. And they actually, as a multiracial couple, lived in the house that had been owned by P.W. Botha, who was one of the first presidents of South Africa and one of the architects of apartheid. So it was interesting to be there and to be in the environment where the church, the main church in South Africa, the Dutch Reformed Church, had been split over this issue, and colored and Bantu theologians had developed a theological paper that argued that apartheid was a heresy, in fact. So all of that sort of environment, to be enmeshed in that for 6 months, also raised that question in me, is like, can the church be something other than what I've experienced? And clearly, the church can do this too. The most recent pilgrimage that I found myself on was during my sabbatical just about a year and a half or so ago. And Lisa and I traveled and met with a couple of members of the staff of the House of One, which is this yet-to-be-built structure in Berlin that sits on the site of what was St. Peter's Church. Now, St. Peter's Church is the oldest church in Berlin, goes back to the 12th century. And during the lead-up and during World War II, the pastor in the pulpit there was one of the most virulent pro-Nazi pastors in Germany leading up to the war. Then with the liberation of Germany, the Red Army comes in, bombing occurs, and the church is damaged to the point of really beyond repair. But then when Germany is split up, okay, this is where St. Peter's is taken over by East Germany. So nobody in the East German government wants to rebuild a church, right? So it becomes a parking lot for decades. The wall comes down, Germany's reunified, and then about a decade or so ago, the remains of the original church, that 12th century church, were discovered underneath this parking lot. And the property rights to that plot had reverted back to the Lutheran Church. And there, of course, it's Germany, so there's a church on every street corner. And so the pastor at the nearby St. Mary's Church began some conversations with the Reform Jewish community and with the Turkish Muslim community there in Berlin. And through a long campaign of private funding, of applying for government grants, public funding, they came up with this idea of the House of One, which would be a city block, basically, that would house a mosque, a synagogue, and a Christian church all together with community and other sort of spaces. And so I read about this and was like, I have to go and see this. I mean, what a story this is. And so we were able to go during sabbatical, meet with some of the program staff, learn a little bit more about the history in terms of the building, and also the work that they were doing with other similar communities that are emerging, quite frankly, all over the world. You may have heard me mention the Tri-Faith Center, which is a partner organization of a mosque, a synagogue, and a United Church of Christ that's in Omaha on one campus. House of One has been in long kind of standing conversation with them as they've done their planning. Likewise, they're in conversation with a community in the Central African Republic that is Muslim and Christian, building a same shared space together in the capital there. The Republic of Georgia, you see Muslims and Christians working on very similar structures that they're sponsoring as well. So the fact that in Berlin, you have this sort of miraculous thing happen where this ancient church where pro-Nazi sermons were given, beginning to become this place of reconciliation and hope, was another really powerful moment for me to ask and answer that question, what can the church do? Well, the church can do this. And so these sort of experiences, and these three, really are the ones that just continue to kind of pop up for me as I think about my sense of call and what it means to be a minister in the 21st century, because there's a lot of cynicism, and I find cynicism kind of in my own life, but there's this really clear kind of thread of optimism that I trace back to this sort of sense from my family that everything is on the table. There's always possibility. There's always room to kind of talk about ideas and build space. And the church can be that sort of catalyst of openness, of change, and of possibility. And it's these sort of examples that I keep coming back to, that if the church can do this, well, the church can do anything. And maybe it's building a new building on top of a 12th century place, or maybe it's just reimagining who we can be in a way that connects to the threads that we've always had, but makes room for one more person, one more idea, one more big hope, one more optimistic voice at the table. So that's a little bit about who I am, at least today, this morning. I can't also, stand up here in a venue like this without, just saying again how grateful and happy I am to be here at Central. This has been yet another one of those places that shaped me a very long time ago, and to be in community again and be part of the homecoming, not only for myself, but for the people who find their home here for the first time, is something I'm just incredibly grateful for. So thanks be to God for that. I'll pass this around too for anybody who's interested. This is just a little bit of literature from the House of One if you want to take a look. Yeah.
What surprises have you seen at Central?
What surprises? I think the surprises that the first surprise that I've had is a very personal one, and that I really kind of imagined coming here that the adjustment would be huge, but it really did feel like coming back home. It just felt like a glove that it always kind of fit, and that was really great. I would say one of the surprises in terms of the work at Central that surprised me is just how well Central weathered COVID. I know how hard it was for every church across the country, and I've heard the stories of just the stress from staff and volunteers, but to kind of look around, especially after being in conversation with peers and having lived through it in a congregation myself, I'm just absolutely just blown away at how well Central weathered COVID. So those are the first two, I would say.
I was interested in South Africa. I spent 3 weeks in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Spent a vacation with 2 classmates I met at Harvard. One of them worked for Royal Head Show, and the other one worked for Anglo-American.
Mm.
Both very much against apartheid and the country was doing all they could to get eliminated. It's interesting that they kept us away from the seedy part. They said, way up there is Soweto, because we never got into Soweto.
Mm-hmm.
Soweto was one of the roaring slums that they had developed apartheid. Interesting. After the week we were there, Mandela was very
Mm-hmm.
Jesse Jackson getting off the plane that we were getting on. He was there with his bag of money, and being a fortune. He had to decide to go and notoriety.
Yeah. Yeah. My boss at the All Africa Conference of Churches when I lived in Kenya was a former Methodist bishop, and he was Mandela's personal pastor. And Mandela came to visit him in Kenya, and I was working in the communication department at the All Africa Conference of Churches. And so similarly, I thought, well, how can I get close to Mandela here? And so, I asked my boss, like, do we need a press release written? Maybe I can come and get a few quotes. He's like, no, this is a pastoral conversation. So, yeah. So, Mandela was one of those people that people just wanted to be close to, Madiba, so to speak. Yeah.
Let me pose a question. In Portside, where do you see the church being and the directions it's going, say, in the next decade?
Do you mean Central, or do you mean the church writ large? So I think my vision. So here's the thing about places like Central. Places like Central are unique in a couple of ways. There are very few places in our society where you can build intergenerational relationships. We're marketed to in a way that sees you only as a 22-year-old or an 82-year-old. But a place like Central is a place where you can build those sort of relationships. And so I think that it's really, really important to lean into that. Second, I think one of the things that's core to disciples theology, that's core to a place like Central, and you will hear it from me until I'm blue in the face, is that who we are is we're a church of the open table. And that's not just a ritual that we do every Sunday. That's our ethos. We build the planks to that open table with everything that we do with our lives. And that's, leaning into that is, whether that's with our outreach, whether that's with, how our elders help provide care and wisdom to the congregation, whether that's, how we construct the next phase in what our children and youth ministry looks like. That's got to be core. So those are kind of the two things that kind of come up when I think about that. Mm-hmm. All right. Anything else? All right. Good to be with you all.
Thank you, Brandon. Next month,